To better understand the recent terror attacks that occurred in Bondi, Australia, that's right, for my international viewers, it's not Bondi, it's Bondi. James Bond. We have to go back to the original OG of terror attacks. That's right, 9/11. And if we understand what happened at 9/11 and why all of these subsequent terror events tie back to that particular main event on September 11 of 2001, the controlled demolition of the Twin Towers. One of the biggest things that people aren't aware of is when these types of events occur, they're planned to create a particular response. And it's the energy generated from that response that can fuel their agenda, their propaganda, their programming and planning. This is how those that operate from behind the shadows are able to use occult law, hidden understanding of energy and consciousness to enact change within the material realm. In other words, to perform magic. Magic isn't a rabbit out of the hat. Magic is to be able to bend reality to your will, to create in this material plane at your own will. What is their desire? What is their meaning? What is their why behind this? We will never really understand. But we can watch their signatures, their symbolism. We can watch them and what they want to create from these types of events, how the story is controlled, the narrative, the story, and then also what happens, what they want our focus to be on. So the events that took place here in Australia last Sunday are definitely a foreshadowing of the likelihood of the type of events that are coming and what these events may be used for. So in order to understand them, we need to go back in time and we need to go where this all began, September 11, 2001. Let's take a step back and understand the significant degrees of a birth chart. When you were born, we look to the sky at the precise moment, time, date, location of your birth, and we look to where the planetary positions were within the zodiac and their relationship to one another. And you have what we call significant or critical degrees based on those placements. In other words, the degree of your rising sign or your sun or your moon becomes supercharged points within the zodiac that are personally connected to you. Therefore, when significant things happen astrologically at those specific points, they tend to be personal for you because your frequency is connected, like your unique energetic blueprint is connected to it. So when it occurs for us cosmically, it's more likely to play out for you personally. And this is how we also understand major events. When there are certain astrological signatures, significant degrees that are really amplified at significant events, we can say the birth chart for that event holds that signature. Therefore, in the future, when other things happen at that specific degree, depending on what degree it is, depending on what planetary position, and depending on what was occurring on the Earth at that particular time, we could say that what happens is the future events link back to that initial one. So how I'm going to explain this is by looking at the birth chart for 9/11. Okay, so this is the precise moment when the first, CGI plane hit the tower before the controlled demolition. Sorry, YouTube. And in particular, what I want to look at, because I've looked at this in previous videos, we've run over the 9/11 chart sometime. So if you're new to my channel, we're just going to have a very brief look here. We're going to look at the position of Pluto and Chiron in the sign of Sagittarius. And opposite was Saturn in Gemini. Gemini is the twins, right? Gemini is also the mind and the duality of our mind. So with Gemini, what happened is the twins were taken down and the veil was removed. It's almost like they're showing us now from September 11 forward, we're able to see the mechanisms behind the veil that kept us unconscious or completely disconnected from reality. And that's happened exponentially since September 11 right through until now. We have a shorter time period where we're able to question the reality that occurs and then be able to call out a little bit like, hang on, that doesn't sit right. So think about September 11. I didn't really come across videos about September 11 until about 2012. So that's about 10 or 11 years later. The moon landing in 1969, right? I didn't really question that until after I started questioning September 11. However, if we fast forward in time, COVID, like it was around the time COVID happened, we started to question it. And for those people, 2021, 2022 started to really question it. The Charlie Kirk assassination, when it happens, it's shocking, it's terrible, But within a month or two, that was only September of this year, and we're in December. Within a month or two, we were like, hang on a second, that story doesn't match up. So what happens is we're able to look back at historical events, and the time frame between the story of what happened and our ability to question it is shrinking down. And I'll talk more about that on the end of this video. So earlier in this video, I mentioned the period between when the event happens, the story or narrative we're told about it, and then the time that elapses before we start to wake up to that and be able to question it, maybe start poking holes in it and start to look at it differently. So if you go back in history, you go back to like the First, Second World War, the Holocaust, moon landing, September 11, COVID, the Charlie Kirk, right? And these things that are happening, what's happening is the time between the narrative and the story and when we actually question it is actually getting really, really, really short now. And what that leads to is either one of two conclusions. Number one, it leads to a mass awakening where all of a sudden the narrative crumbles instantly and the faith or belief in a government controlled narrative doesn't allow any of that narrative to emerge whatsoever. People are just like, from the get go, this is bullshit. So that could lead to a mass awakening. And the second potential is because we're moving towards this singularity point where with the actual event and the time it takes us to call bullshit is actually now they're coinciding together, you might end up with mass censorship or a complete restriction on your ability to question anything. So both potentials are possible as we move towards that point, and we're probably pretty close. If we go back to September 11, we had Pluto, the lord of the underworld, the collective unconscious, in the signature of Sagittarius, which rules organized religion. And what we had on September 11 was the initiation of the war on terror. And it was an ideological war. It was a war around beliefs. It was a war around Christianity and, Islam. Embedded into that event was the trigger for a war on terror. And a psychological wound for the collective occurred at that particular moment. And when we want to understand wounds, our hurt, our pain, and our ability to heal, we want to look to the position of Chiron, the wounded centaur, either natally or at its position when a particular event occurs where there is mass influence, right? In other words, there's a lot of hurt, pain, or there's even a lot of death associated often when there's this Chiron. What happens is there's a collective psychological wounding that occurs that's now connected to the Chiron's position, and it amplifies that 21, 2, 3, 4 degrees of Sagittarius. In particular, 22 to 24 degrees of Sagittarius, 1 degree orb of either side of 23, which is where it is at this particular precise time, becomes an amplified degree in the zodiac. And what happens is when there's significant events that occur that trigger that degree, then psychologically our wound takes us back to 9/11, right? So when there is something that happens in the future at 22, 23, or 24 degrees of Sagittarius, it has the same theme associated to this particular event on 9/11, it's going to trigger our psychological wounding. If you go back to the Boxing Day tsunami, right, where there was like 250,000 people around the world were injured or killed by that particular event, right? So in that time, we had Saturn, okay, opposite Chiron. You have this major event occurring, you have this chironic signature that happens. So to the signature for Chiron and our wounding, which is going to trigger our fear, right? Remember September 11 when that happened? The shock, the fear, the outrage, the anger, the helplessness, the despair, the grief. Imagine the collective energy that's occurring when September 11 happens and we're all in shock. We're all in like dismay and we're all in despair. We're angry, we're grieving, we're upset, we're frustrated. Like there's a lot of collective emotional energy known as loosh. That this collective loosh, what it does is it imprints on the collective consciousness and it creates this schism at the frequency. Now, the Chiron position helps us understand that sensitive point within the zodiac, within the 360-degree circle in the sky, the magic alchemical wheel, the great alchemical wheel, what part of that particular wheel is going to trigger us for that same response in relation to organized religious conflict, which has created this war on terror, right? We've got to be afraid of belief structures. Okay, just a quick note that when I first began recording this video, I was traveling and I was halfway through recording it and I got disrupted, so I had to pause the recording. And when I came back to finish the recording, I forgot to unpause it, so I lost the second half of this video. And now that I'm back home in my office, I'm going to get a chance to sit down and record the second half now. So that's why the backdrop, my clothes, and the setting has changed. So let's get into this. Just trying a new layout here with my Zoom recording, and let's just see how it goes, shall we? So here's the birth chart for 9/11. And what we're going to do now is we're going to lay over the top of this, the birth chart for the Bondi shooting. So the precise date and location, Bondi, 6:47 p.m. on the 14th of December. In what we're going to do now is we're going to lay the birth chart over the top of September 11, and we're going to look at some of its signatures. And you can see the sun at 22 degrees of Sagittarius conjunct the Chiron of September 11. And we have also Chiron in the sky. This is the Chiron for the time of the Bondi shooting, was at 22 degrees of Aries. So the sun and Chiron were connected via trine, and we had the moon moving into an opposition to Chiron at that same time as well. So both luminaries, sun and moon, connected strongly to Chiron in the sky, and they all funnel down to the sun, making its conjunction to Chiron of the September 11 birth chart. The Hegelian dialectic of problem, reaction, solution. Let's look at 9/11. Problem, plane flying into the Twin Towers there, collapse. Reaction, worldwide outrage. Solution, war on terror, which then created the motivation and the support for the war in Afghanistan, which later then moved to the war on Iraq, the second Iraq war. But, what they need is they need consent. They need support for these types of things. So, one could argue that their desire for this war on terror, which is actually just the war on people, it's the system coming after you and your freedom and your ability to communicate and, also to challenge the ruling class. They don't want that. So the beginning of this process, September 11, is where it all started. And there's a deep psychological wound around that this is a war. This is an ideological war. This is a war on religion. This is a war on belief systems, right? So then you bring that forward to the Bondi shooting and you have the same type of thing. You have a mass event, right? And people die during 9/11, and most likely people die during the Bondi shooting. And it's not necessarily about that. It is the problem, which then creates the reaction. And what did you have immediately after the Bondi shooting, which was this outrage, right? And it was targeted at the Islamist faith and the radicalization of Islam. And this is the ideological, spiritual, religious war that takes us back to the war on terror. So we can clearly see the outrage and how psychologically it's connected back to September 11, whether people are aware of that or not. But it's the same type of outrage again, right? So it's the same theme. It's the same symbolism associated to this. So the problem is the shooting. The reaction is the people's outrage. And what are they trying to do for the solution? That's what you've got to do in these types of events, is take a step back and look at, okay, what do they want out of this? Now, never let a good crisis go to waste. So the government's going to use this for further censorship. They've already brought in new gun laws. All of this is controlling the people. It's got nothing to do with radicalization, because these people apparently were on the ASIO list, but apparently were able to get firearms. So really, tightening the gun laws is not necessarily the thing. That's to tighten the gun laws to make it more difficult for people to get access to firearms. Now, that doesn't restrict criminals. That doesn't restrict terrorists. That doesn't restrict those that don't give a fuck about law and order. But what it does do is it restricts the common person. And one might argue, well, what does it matter? Why do we need guns? And it's like, you don't until you do. And when you do, you do. And now the common person's ability to actually get access to firearms is just restricted even further. Why would they want to do that? Right? Now, they've used this event
as their agenda and the support for that. So people don't contest that. But and people go, "That's a good idea. That's a good idea. Look, oh my God, if they were tied to gun laws, maybe they wouldn't have got guns." Well, they were already on the ASIO watch list. So hang on, why don't we just look at that process first, rather than just okay, we've got to put new gun laws in place. It seems a little bit odd to me. The next thing that you're seeing come out of this is censorship. So hate speech and hate crimes and all of this anti-Semitic sort of stuff, right? Again, that isn't targeted at Israel or the Jews or Islam or anything like that. That's you targeted at your ability to speak out against the government. And they're going to use that because once they have that law in place, hate speech laws and things like that, that's not specific or unique, like just to this particular agenda. That's broadcast, right? That's a broad spectrum law, which means that you all of a sudden speak out against a corrupted government, and the next thing, oh well, you spoke out, and that's creating division and hate and unrest and instability, and there's a law now that we have, and you go to jail, straight to jail. So I just wanted to add this little tidbit in as I got back from my bike ride, and it's hot in Queensland. I want you to jump over to Dale Holmes's YouTube page, watch his last video. He did a comprehensive 1 hour breakdown of the Bondi shooting, with all of the symbolism and taking it back to lots of different agendas, and also taking it forward into, what they're using this for. So he does a fantastic, phenomenal breakdown. That video has, yeah, it's a really well put together video with lots of different angles covered. So I encourage you to go over and check it out. Make sure you subscribe to his channel. He's putting a lot of good content up. I'll put his channel details and that video link in the notes below. Cheers. So those things are absolutely part of this, but the bigger agenda when you take a step back is what? Is the support for the religious war that's on the cards in the future. What you've got to understand is we've been living in the age of belief, the age of Pisces, right? Why do we have belief systems and organized religion? Is because the people en masse have disconnected from their true relationship with God, source, their connection. And that connection is an internal connection. But we fell unconscious in the age of Pisces. We fell asleep. We got disconnected. Pisces is two fish with their tails connected, swimming in two different directions. That's your higher self connected to source, and your lower self that's here down in the mundane physical world. And there is a connection, but it's an unconscious connection. And the two aspects of you are lost in the ocean, in the sea, in the dream state, in the asleep state. So the intermediary between God, source, creator, and the mundane people lost at sea becomes organized religion. Now, as we move out of this age and into the age of Aquarius, the age of Aquarius is the age of knowing. So we're going out of belief into knowing. In belief, you need to have a belief, a faith, a religious sort of dogmatic approach to your access to God. Okay. Now, in the age of knowing, you don't have belief, you know. And the age of knowing is also the age of Aquarius, the age of the awakening of Christ consciousness within humans, within us. We don't need an external savior, right? That's part of the end of the age of Pisces is the savior God. Who's going to save us? The government's going to save us? Trump's going to save us? Stay tuned to my next video, which is all about the potential upcoming Trump assassination. Make sure you hit subscribe to get that latest video when it drops. So there is no savior. In the age of Aquarius, there is no savior. In the age of Pisces, there's an external savior because we're lost, we're disconnected, we're swimming around unconscious. We're going to fuck ourselves and fuck each other over. Why? Because we're disconnected, we're lost. Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. Look at them, they're all fucking asleep. So as we're coming out of that age, and we are coming out of that age, we're coming out of that age, you look around and see the awakening of consciousness, the great awakening that's occurring. And will not be televised. It's the awakening of the people. And what are we doing? What's happening is everything's being exposed to us. Since September 11, the veil has come down and we're starting to see reality. And it's a fucking nightmare. Why? Because this is what happens when you spend 2,000 years asleep. So as we come into the age of Aquarius, the age of knowing, we have no use for organized religion anymore. Because the awakening of Christ consciousness happens within the individual, within each of us, within humanity. Now, there are going to be people and souls that don't wake up, that will die with the age of Pisces. And that's already happening exponentially, especially since COVID. So let's take a step back here and look back at this chart. Here is the wound, the psychological wound in the sign of organized religion. Chiron at 23 degrees of Sagittarius. The Bondi shooting has the sun at 22 degrees of Sagittarius. Chiron, 22 degrees Aries. Moon, opposite, triggering all of this. Why do they want the same trigger? Because that's the next war, right? And they need your support. They need your consent to allow this to happen. When there is outrage because the next event that occurs in some other place around the world, right, with the same theme and blamed on the same people, it'll gain more support and more and more and more. And you'll watch this exponentially increase as we move into the new year and towards February until there will be a significant catalyst, which will then trigger the consent, support, motivation for the religious war that's coming. And this will be the third and final world war. And this is what they're being preparing for since before September 11. These buildings were built with the very purpose and intention to be brought down at that precise moment because the people playing this game are playing the Game of Thrones and they look to the sky clock and they know exactly what time it is. And what they do is they mirror the story up here and they mirror it down here so they can remain gods of the material realm. And it's time the people wake up to that because these events are occurring. And, let's take a step back and look even a little bit more deeply. Let's just look at the astrology for this particular event on Sunday. What you've got here is Mars at the anaretic critical degree of Sagittarius. Sagittarian is the archer. Okay. So firing is arrow. Remember that. It's the archer, the symbol of the archer. This gets really deep when we look to where this took place. But this Mars, right, violent attack at this most critical sensitive degree of Sagittarius, the sign where our deep psychological wound is, where the war on terror began, where this religious sort of war was seeded within our collective unconscious. Now, it was directly square to Neptune, and Neptune rules over Pisces, which is the other spiritual sign. And this is the ability to have faith and belief and to connect with the all. This Mars squared directly to Neptune, and it creates this fucking schism. And what do you have with Pisces? You have despair, helplessness, victim. And look to who's playing the victim. Look who's being blamed. This is all the negative aspect of Pisces. Because there has to be, because I have identified strongly with a particular ideology or belief or faith or race or gender or whatever the thing is. So therefore, it's not me. I don't have to look at myself. I have to look outside of myself, and there has to be someone to blame. So that's what they give us. They give us that story, right? Pick your side, choose your side. There's someone to blame. Well, there's three sides here. There's what they want you to believe on one side. There's the opposition to that. And then there's the middle fucking finger, the middle pillar, which is the path. Neither. Observation. Depolarization. Depolarization is a path to self-actualization. And what is this causing with the Mars square Neptune? This is causing a further amplification of division. And this Neptune gives this mass emotional outpouring, right? This is mass emotional outpouring, this louche energy. Go back to the last lunar eclipse, the Charlie Kirk assassination. Mass emotional energy. You had one side laughing and rejoicing and pointing the finger. You had the other side just completely outraged. It's the same game. Divide and conquer. Divide and conquer. Now, Pluto sitting in Aquarius. Pluto deals with transformation through crisis, but polarization to extremes. And what we're having with Pluto and Aquarius is we're having all these extremes come to the surface. And you don't want to be in a fundamentalist extremist group on any ideological, any race, any religion, any gender, anything. You don't want to be out on those extremes because the way in which Pluto will transform through crisis is to polarize the extremes into extreme pressure point, which then the only way those extremes can unify is through conflict. Okay, so the conflict is when they can come back together and fight one another. And that's the only way this gets resolved. So there is going to be casualties on both sides. This is the end of organized religion. This next war is to eliminate this. Okay. So you don't want to, and maybe out of this, the Great Reset is the one world government, one world religion, one world currency, one world coming together. That is their artificial overlay of what they're trying to do over this. And that also will fail. So again, you have to pull back another layer, another level, another objectification and observe, witness, but don't get caught up in it. If you're having an emotional response, like an intense one, and you're upset or you're grieving or angry, cool, you're human, great. But it's what you choose to do with it that counts. And if you pour it into the actual fire that's being stoked and intentionally stoked, why did they choose that particular day, that particular location, that particular time for this event to occur? Because they knew that's what the clock said. And they're playing the Game of Thrones. You got to wake up to this. You got to wake up to this. And the story and the agenda and the people and the puppets and the people and the outcry and the news and it's part of their whole story. You want to ascend above that and watch it and observe it. So let's take a quick look at where they chose to do this last particular event. Archer Park, Bondi. Bondi is interesting too because Bondi is one of those locations that's known around the world. It's like a Sydney, it's like a New York or a Paris. People know Bondi Beach, Bondi Beach. They chose Archer Park. But here is the symbol for Sagittarius, the archer. And where was Chiron during 9/11 where the war on terror began? In the sign of the archer. Right. So nothing is by chance. Nothing is coincidental. This is all connected and connected for very good reason because when they look to the clock, they can then understand the type of experience that consciousness is going through here on the material realm. And what they do is they tune into that, to channel into that, to hijack that, so that these events have the desired outcome. Problem, reaction, solution. Well, we have to support for the war on terror. Watch when Israel bombs Iran again. Well, they blow up the Dome of the Rock. Okay, watch what's coming. This is the agenda that they need your consent. They need your support. They need your outrage. They need your loosh in order for this to occur for them. In my last video, I'll put it up here. Okay, talking all about the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that's coming in 0 degrees Aries, meaning that Saturn-Neptune's transit through Aries next year and for the next 2 years or so means that this is Mars's territory. Mars is the god of war, of conflict, of aggression, of assertion, of accidents and attacks. Are we going to see an intensification of this? Absolutely. You better be prepared. And the best time to do that now is now. Prepare yourself for what's ahead. Because if everything like this that continues to occur, and it will, is going to create instability, uncertainty, and you need to disconnect from it. You need to come back to yourself, back to what really matters most for you. Focus on the present, the here and the now, and what's right in front of you, and forget the rest of it. Become the cow in the paddock that eats the grass, and none of this exists for the cow. So it's a version of reality. It's the reality that they want to give us to say, this is how it's happening in the world. Okay, but it's not true. And I'll tell you why it's not true, because the cow is not part of that reality. And you can choose to be the cow and eat the fucking grass. And it's not part of your reality. So if you're overwhelmed, if you're, oh my God, this is something, what are we going to do? And you're in that state of panic and fear and anxiety and you don't know what to do and you're so, go be a cow, is my advice for 2026. So as promised, my next video is going to be looking at the solar eclipse on February 17th, 28 degrees of Aquarius, and in particular, where it happens to be falling on some very influential, powerful people's charts. And why I think that just as I predicted Donald Trump's assassination attempt in 2024, moving forward, we'll finish this little video on Mars-Uranus conjunct in Taurus with a look at the political charts of Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Michael Obama. This alignment is in Donald Trump's 10th house. So 10th house is his career or his public reputation. And this alignment is directly square to his natal Mars. So that could represent some sort of political attack on Donald Trump, maybe literal, maybe physical, maybe there's an attempt, like an assassination attempt, or maybe there's just some big volatile changes happening in his political public life. All eyes should be on that particular man. Because as we come out of this age of Pisces, the age of the unconscious, the dream, the illusion, the age of belief, the age of the savior, I will tell you right now, no one is coming to save you. The person here to save you is staring you back in the mirror. You have to awaken to that. Now, if you choose to get caught up and identify with the division, the hate, the war, the anger, the outrage, the grief, the celebration, whatever it might be, then you are going to need a savior. And you are not going to be able to do that for yourself. So why I think that Donald Trump, as being touted as the savior to fix all this mess, to save the world from the edge of disaster, I think will be taken out. And Donald Trump is not the savior. Donald Trump is the trumpet. And the trumpet's job is to do one thing, is to raise the dead. Raise the dead is all of the stuff we've been unconscious about. All the things that have been hidden, concealed, coming to light. And what you're realizing if you're paying attention is to the level of corruption that this darkness has infiltrated into our reality. And that those that have been possessed by this darkness have found themselves into positions of bureaucracy, control, media, government, political, corporate positions of power. And they don't have the will of the people, humanity's best interests at heart. In fact, they probably don't even have a fucking heart. They certainly don't have a soul. They sold that long ago. So wake up now, because it's time that Kansas is going bye-bye. I'm Luke Belk. This is Astro Awakening. Make sure you hit the subscribe for my next video. You're not going to want to miss it. And I'll see you soon. Peace out.